Guys, Philip Larkin, aside from John Keats, he's my favorite poet that we read in this class. Aside from John Keats, is my favorite poet that we teach in this class. He is fantastic. Well, he's fantastic asterisk. He's great if you don't look too close at his personal life, which is maybe he had some unsavory views that are like not so great, but his writing is pretty awesome. So he was born in 1922 and he died in 1985. From an early age, he was really interested in writing and poetry and bonded with other poets while he was at school at Oxford. After leaving Oxford, he became a librarian at Shropshire and then later in Belfast. In 1955, he served as a librarian in Hull, at the University of Hull, and it was there that he stayed until his death. So from 1955 to 1985, he was a librarian at a university. He started off with a staff of just 11, and at his death 30 years later, he had a staff of 100 people. And it's kind of interesting that he held this position because over those 30 years, he became increasingly well known as a poet, but he never gave up his job. And I just think that's a really fascinating thing about him. He had a number of relationships with women, but he never married. He did live twice with women for longer periods of time. And in 1974, he bought a house and settled down with a woman named Monica Jones, who was his companion, I think, for the rest of his life, if I'm not mistaken. In 1984, having achieved a lot of success as a writer, he was offered the poet laureateship by then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. He was friendly with Margaret Thatcher. He knew her. They were admirers of each other. And even though he was offered this great honor by her of the poet laureateship, he turned it down. And again, this is something really interesting about Larkin. He didn't feel like he wanted to be pigeonholed that way or placed on a pedestal that way. Larkin was terrified of death. This is just an interesting thing that you see sometimes in his poems, not so much in the ones that we're going to read though. So despite this, of course, he, like everyone else, dies, right? Within a year of refusing the poet laureateship, he was diagnosed with cancer and he underwent surgery for it and died during the surgery. So he's kind of has a sad life story. And like I said, if you dig deep into who he was as a person, you'll find some unsavory views, some things that he said that were not politically correct, that were awful to hear. But if you read his poetry, what you'll find is a really fresh and interesting perspective on things. So one of my favorite poems that we're going to read that has, I mean, I don't think this is a spoiler alert, but maybe spoiler alert, has lots of cursing, lots of the F-bombs, so just heads up. We're gonna read This Be the Verse. I love this poem. I have it memorized. You should memorize it, and then any time for the rest of your life you have friends that complain about their parents, you should just recite this poem to them. It's like perfect for that, all right? So This Be the Verse, fabulous, fabulous poem. We're also reading a poem called Church Going, which is a poem about his distaste for religion, but it's a more complicated poem than that because at the end of the poem, he acknowledges that all human beings everywhere have a deep desire to want to believe or understand or have faith in something. So it's a really powerful poem where he's sort of like talks about how he doesn't really buy religion, but then also talks about this universal desire in humanity to have a spiritual connection to something. So it's a really, really solid poem. Enjoy that one. I think that's all we're reading. Philip Larkin is great. Enjoy him.